Let's get right to our panel. We're going to be talking about water scarcity, the politics of water allocation, modernization needs, project delivery. These are all very highly accomplished people, and I want to thank them for being with us, taking time from their schedules, from their corporate schedules to be with us. To my immediate left is Virginia Grebbien, former president of Parsons Environment and Infrastructure and current chief of staff of Parsons Corporation. Virginia joined Parsons 2008, has 30 years of industry experience in the water sector, as well as considerable experience in public policy and government relations, project development, business development, and so forth. She's served on numerous industry boards and is currently the co-chair of the Southern California Water Committee's Delta Task Force. Please welcome Virginia Grebbien. Next to Virginia is Tony Bouchard, president of CDM Smith North America. Tony has 30 years of experience in the consulting industry. He joined CDM Smith last year from his previous position as executive vice president of AECOM's America's Water business. Prior to that, he served in successive regional management roles with AECOM and directed all business lines within the Americas. Please welcome Tony Bouchard. Dr. Mike MacPhee is our third panelist. He is the Chief Strategic Advisor at Carolla Engineers. Until recently, he was president of the North America Water Division for Arcadis. Mike has over 2 decades of experience in providing water consulting services to municipal, federal, and industrial clients across the United States. He served in key management roles with Arcadis for many years prior to joining his current company. Please welcome Dr. Mike MacPhee. And next to Mike is Peter Nichol, CH2M's Global Water Business Group President. Peter is responsible for all activities within CH2M, including oversight of the consulting activities, program management, design build, and operations. His clients are government, industrial, and energy organizations, including public-private partnerships. Peter has more than 35 years of experience in the engineering industry and has held key management positions throughout his career. Please welcome Peter Nichol. Now, Virginia is going to moderate the panel, and she can handle this any way she wants. I understand that they might be making brief presentations to begin with. Virginia, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I know we're all very happy to be here this morning and very excited to talk about water for about an hour. And what we hope to do is have a brief discussion amongst us and then a lot of dialogue and Q&A with the audience. So, you know, normally these panels are titled Water is the New Oil, as opposed to, you know, water is the new gold rush. So as I was thinking about this panel, I went to the fountain of all knowledge, Google, and Googled water is the new oil, and 241 million hits later, along with a Rolling Stones article, I thought, well, that's a bit overwhelming, so let me Google water is the next gold rush, and that was 12 million Google hits and quite some interesting correlations between water and industry. But really, what this boils down to is water is an axis or foundational resource. And unlike our other natural resources, it's monetized differently because water is held in trust for the public. And so water is complicated, and we all intrinsically know that it has a value. So we tend to equate it with some of the most important monetary analogies that we can, which makes it very complicated to talk about in an hour. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring up 4 different topics that are kind of representative of the water market and the policies and the issues facing water, and hopefully barely scratch the surface of the subject in an interesting way this morning. So we're going to start with Peter, and Peter's going to get us going a little bit on the challenges and opportunities facing our firms in the water industry.
Thanks, Virginia. When we were talking about the questions beforehand, I was wondering how I was going to answer this one, but then now that Richard's spoken, I think I'll just take his presentation and insert here. It really, when you look at it and you talk about doing Google searches and a variety of other things like that, without water, we don't have an oil industry. We don't have a mining industry, so you wouldn't have the gold rush of water. Last night, we wouldn't have had food or beer with respect to that. And this morning, we wouldn't have had coffee to wake everybody back up. So it really is foundational with respect to everything that we're looking at. So from an opportunities and a challenges perspective, what are we really looking at? There's a finite amount of water out there. How we treat it is really what makes it available to us to utilize in the future again. So we've really got to take care of it, because each time we recycle it through again, it's going to become that much more challenging again to utilize it, clean it up, and be able to either produce or consume so that we can move forward with it. So what we're really challenged by is that when we look at the impact of things like climate change, and we can argue the science all we want, but nobody can argue the fact that there's more intense storm events that are out there. We're certainly having more instances of long-term droughts. And then with the urbanization that Richard referred to, we're taxing the infrastructure that we already have in place in all of our cities and towns, where we're having people come to live, and manufacturing and industries producing products that are all utilizing water in one form or another. So what are we really trying to focus on? It's how do we take that and utilize it to the best of our abilities with respect to that. There's technologies that are out there that we can apply. There's staff implications. We need to attract, develop, and retain staff in the marketplace because they are the creative minds that really drive your company's successes, our clients, and then the stakeholders that consume that. So we're really trying to figure out, as we work through all of the details with respect to water, is how do we deal with that? How do we work that and really focus on, from a challenge perspective, we've got a degrading quality of water, or on the drought side of things, we don't have enough water, or on the flooding side of things, we have way too much water in a place that we don't want it. So we need to work with Mother Nature. We've learned over time that you're not going to control it, you need to mitigate it. And so when we're looking at engineering solutions with respect to that, how do we mitigate the impacts of these extreme storm events? And then how do we put the technologies in place so that we can treat the water to qualities that we need to either use it for potable uses or for non-potable uses, so that we have the quality and the supply that we require to keep the world economy working, but also to keep us all healthy. When you look at the triangle that we were talking about earlier, it's the forefront of why we all exist today, because we're mostly water too. So it's really something that, you know, it's out there, you know, all of the creative capabilities that you and your organizations certainly drive solutions with the clients that are out there. The biggest challenge that each and every one of us face is that there's huge demand for the services that we provide, and nobody has enough money to really do solutions that we really could put in place. A lot of the technologies exist, a lot of the capabilities exist. It's, do we have the financial wherewithal to figure out how we're going to pay for it and how we're going to make sure we have water in the right places that we need it. We can mitigate the impact of water in the places that we don't really want to have it. And then how do we move forward with it for the future? So,
kind of a quick question. Have any of you noticed, because everyone here is a national and an international practitioner, have any of you noticed a difference in solutions or client behavior in the large market, moderate growth states like California, New York, Texas, versus the smaller market, high growth states in the Northeast, for example? You've seen different practices, different approaches.
You guys want to start on that one?
I could take a stab at that. From my perspective, probably what I see is a common thread between the first grouping and the second grouping is probably a more higher appetite, a look at alternative delivery models, how to deliver the projects, whether it's your traditional design, bid, build, or it's one of the myriad forms of alternative delivery. We see the larger, perhaps somewhat more sophisticated clients looking at the different models out there.
And that brings up another good question, which is the talent in our organizations. Forget about the clients for a minute. Don't tell them I said that. But the talent in our organizations, what kind of talent are you looking for and training and attracting and retaining that can participate in the alternative delivery approaches as opposed to a traditional planning study or design study?
Well, I mean, this notion of war for talent and making sure that we're able to keep engineers interested in pursuing careers in water is extremely important. We're competing against other industries, many of which are paying more. And that's a battle we've got to pay close attention to. But we want those folks that are bold. We need folks who are willing to push the limits and test the rest of us on new ideas and concepts. And it makes work much more fun. The clients are more stimulated by it. And I think I see our industry wanting to push boundaries further and further.
I think the diversity of what we're hiring from a talent perspective today too. You know, a lot of the traditional engineering firms were built on engineering.
Right.
But when you look at it today, I mean, we've got scientists, we've got planners, we've got computer specialists. When you look at the digitization or, you know, really all of the computer savvy, the sensors that were out there, we can monitor many more things than we even know what to do with, the data management that comes into that. So it's the diversity of talents that we really need to be able to meet the demands of the services and the solutions that we're trying to work with our clients for.
One more quick question on this topic. Do you believe or do you think that there is a discrepancy or difference between our public sector clients and ourselves as industry folks in terms of embracing innovation and accepting innovation and implementing it?
I think there is. I think that if you look at it, there's the differences between the public and the private sector. The private sector, typically water is a raw material that's utilized and it's a cost to them. And so they're challenging us to be more creative with our solutions so that we can keep their costs down and keep the volume of water availability up. If you take an example of a tapered beer can today, the tapered can takes 10 times the amount of water to produce than a conventional can that we've had for the last 20 years. So the demand in the marketplace is everybody wants the tapered can because it's much more attractive, and when you go into a store, visually appealing. And so from a marketing perspective, outstanding. From a water use perspective, 10 times the water volume that they're actually looking at. And so our industry is challenged to really come up with creative ways of solving that so we can improve those efficiencies, because a lot of them are producing those cans in water-strapped areas. So they have a finite amount of water that they can utilize. And then on the public side, they're producing a consumable. And so when it comes to innovation, they want innovation, but they want to prove it.
Yeah.
Because nobody wants to take a risk, because when you put it out in the marketplace, you know, you're really putting out a product that people need to know that when they turn that tap, they put it in a glass, and then they consume it, that it's not going to kill them. And unfortunately, there have been instances around the world where that has been, you know, the outcome. And so it's a natural tendency that from a risk aversion perspective, certainly public sector clients are dealing with a product that they're using in a different manner.
Two different risk profiles.
Very different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to one of my favorite topics, water reuse. So Tony, tell us a little bit about what's happening in the field of water reuse and what the state of the industry is.
Thank you, Virginia. Pete just alluded to some challenges that we have in the water industry, and you probably realize I'm speaking of the horrible situation in Flint. But at the same time, it is a very exciting time in our industry. Our global population is continuing to grow, as Richard noted, and growing. The trend is into the urban areas, and our commitment for the folks in this room who work in the water industry of providing safe drinking water and sanitation, we're seeing the advances of water technology really being a key to these cities, to smart cities, to strong and sustainable communities around the world, because water is a foundational need for each and every one of us. But as Pete mentioned, encouraging investment and innovation in water supply can be challenging for a simple reason. Most of our infrastructure in the water business is invisible. So getting people to commit to the needs to solve some of the challenge we have is significant. Now, we're all aware of the droughts, particularly in the West, and if there is any small sliver of a silver lining in that situation is it has changed the public perception around water reuse. And so we're seeing rapid increase in people's willingness to explore reuse in areas that it previously was not. There are two examples to explain that. Many, many years ago when I started out, and as I like to say, when I used to do real work, it was in the water reuse arena, and that was to build treatment plants that provided water for irrigation and other sources. But now we're talking about using that water for indirect potable reuse, where it's re-injected into aquifers and then comes out the other end through a water treatment plant, and people are interested in that, and that's being done. We also have direct potable reuse, where it's actually put back into the water supply. And 15, 20 years ago, while the research was being done, people didn't want to hear about that toilet to tap scenario. But today, again, to that small silver lining out of the drought, people are willing to talk about that as a sustainable solution to these significantly longer, prolonged, and perhaps more frequent droughts that we're seeing. Whether you believe all the science behind it or not, that Peter alluded to, it is certainly there. So when you couple that growing public awareness with the innovative work that water professionals are doing every day to make water reuse more safe, more reliable, and practical, the advancements that we've seen are actually quite remarkable. So the technology is there. The metering and monitoring for the safety of the end product is enhanced significantly. We're looking at new technology that enhances the effectiveness of membrane filtration, or even getting the quality of water we need without membrane, and therefore reducing the brine discharge. And so really the convergence of the need and the innovation that is underway is creating this really exciting time around water reuse as a sustainable solution for our water supply and wastewater treatment needs.
One of the comments that Richard made, which I thought was very interesting in his comments this morning, was overregulation. So, Mike, what do you think? Is the regulation in water recycling balanced, overregulated, under?
Yeah, I think the regulators are learning along the way like the rest of us, aren't they? I think Peter said we can't make mistakes. The risk tolerance for us is very low, but there are a lot of global examples out there where cities have learned what we are now learning in the Southwest. Singapore, which was brought up in the first talk, is a great example of a city that has really gone through all this reuse learning, has applied it, and very importantly, did it in a way that the public really accepted. You know, in Singapore, the phrase is new water.
Right.
It's not toilet to tap, it's not all. So they have climbed over the last barrier that we in the U.S. need to get over. The technology's there. We know how to do this. It's our acceptance as a public and a regulatory community that is the last step.
Well, and really, on that, the reality is that most water being consumed today in the world is reused. Right. If you're on a river system, or if you're on water supply from the Great Lakes, if you look at you know what it is, there's a community that has a water plant, a wastewater plant, a water plant, a wastewater plant. You just go around, and you know we're putting these in and out of the natural environment on a regular basis, and so there is indirect potable reuse going on all the time. It's interesting, if we put it out in nature, it's publicly acceptable. If we try to deal with it technically and that kind of thing, it gets challenged as something that is not acceptable. And that's really, I think, what Singapore overcame, and I think that is the challenge for us in the North American marketplace for us to get to, because we're challenged in multiple communities with respect to both supply and quality of the product we're dealing with.
That brings in another interesting question. Do you think, in your opinions, can we get to a sustainable water supply that's foundational on conservation, water reuse, locally developed supplies, stormwater management, stormwater reuse, and move away, like a lot of stakeholder communities would like us to do, from imported delivery systems? Can we achieve that nirvana? Do you think that's possible? The mayor of LA does. The mayor of LA does. That's his stated goal.
Nobody wants to answer that one.
Well, I would say that, of course, anything's possible that we put our minds to. It may take some time. It may take a lot of effort across all the stakeholders, and I think that what we have to do is to bring together the right stakeholders and look at those new models. We can't be working in individual silos. You guys can help me with the numbers, but I think there's 25,000 separate water agencies.
I think it's 50,000.
50,000?
Yes, 50,000.
In the United States? Well, just think about it. If you brought some of those together, they could create a sustainable solution for a broader area instead of having individual silos. I'm not going to name any cities, but in one location where a city, big city in one state, literally across the road, a big city in another state, there were two wastewater plants 100 yards apart. And one was doing an expansion, and one was experiencing population decrease and had excess capacity, and they wouldn't talk. I mean, that's crazy. So you've got a lot of political needs and political communications that need to take place to overcome those types of examples.
I think the other piece of that is the cost. So if you take back to Singapore as an example, they still import water from Malaysia because it's cheaper than, their reuse, their desal, their, the treatment options, and a variety of other things. So as long as they have that as a lower cost option, they'll leverage that, and I think that's the same in all of our markets today. But I think sort of overcoming some of the political obstacles is the biggest thing that we have, because jurisdictions are very proud of their communities, and rightfully so, but at the same time they have the blinders on sometimes to really understand that if they work together, they could have a much more effective solution set, and they could all probably pay for it at a lower cost.
So let's talk about an issue that takes a lot of collaboration, coordination, and communication, which is climate change, adaptation, incorporating resiliency into our infrastructure. So Mike, why don't you give us some background on that?
Yeah, I suppose when we talk resiliency, we're covering some of the earlier topics because it's water poor, not enough water, and the paradigm of too much water, of course, and I'll weave it into climate change adaptation in a second. But there's really three aspects to resiliency. The first is the resource side of the equation, the notion of reliable and safe sources of supply, and the more reserves you have, the more resilient the community is. The second aspect, of course, is water-related disasters, and the immediate thing we think of is floods. And then the third area is a whole cast of vulnerabilities. And those include climate change, coastal erosion is another, pollution of all sorts. But just kind of taking this climate change piece for a second, obviously we have persistent drought, and Tony talked about the Southwest, but this notion of persistent drought comes up all over the United States. I remember 10, 12 years ago, the Mid-Atlantic on the East Coast was extremely concerned about persistent drought, Baltimore County, and then it rained. And the attention from that kind of went away, but it's not just a Southwest issue. Mega storms, of course, and risk of flooding, the Katrinas of the world have become a great concern. Most often we are in the reactive space around that, but we'll talk in a second about getting more proactive. And of course, more insidious is sea level rise, and cities are becoming much more aware, and many are engaging firms to do some sea level rise modeling to understand their vulnerabilities and where inundation could occur. But what can we do to be proactive rather than reactive in our infrastructure, in our planning? I think Peter touched on something important earlier about uniting not only the engineering capabilities, but, for example, putting all of that together with urban planning. Absolutely critical for us in resiliency. So there's 4 or 5 topic areas that I raised for people to think about. We've talked about reuse, obviously efficiency, water loss control, extremely important for resilient cities. Flood protection, which could include everything from barriers to dunes to dikes, and many parts of the world have much more experience with this than we do. The Dutch, for example, the Danish. And that flood protection needs to consider direct storm events, as we know, but also storm surge, and then of course sea level rise. Green infrastructure, as opposed to gray piped infrastructure, and this notion of incorporating more green space in our cities. The idea of, for example, stormwater being captured and attenuated and staying within the basin rather than being piped out of the basin. Incredibly important to improve our resiliency. Redevelopment of industrial areas to residential and commercial, and involving the community to understand their passions around that. And maybe lastly, rethinking waterfronts and what they look like. New York City, for example, as a result of Superstorm Sandy, not only thinking about barriers for the future, but also greenscapes along the waterfront, grassy areas, walking paths through those kinds of urban developments are extremely important. So I just want to leave you with one quote from the Rockefeller Foundation that is now working with a lot of local communities, and these solutions tend to be very local. And as proof of that, we see many cities and towns appointing chief resiliency officers to address all of the governmental, political, financial aspects of this. There are over 100 of those now in the United States, and the Rockefeller Center stays closely in touch with those. But Rockefeller says, resiliency is the capacity to prepare for and recover from disruptive experiences. Something to really think about, both on the water poor side and the too much water side. So a few thoughts and comments, Virginia.
Can you, does anyone have any comments about best practices that you use within your own organizations to ensure that sustainability and resiliency concepts are included as you develop solutions to clients' problems? How do you mix the gray and the green guys and folks in your teams?
Go ahead, Tom.
I think from our perspective, it goes to the diversity of the disciplines you have in your firm. When I started out, you had engineers and architects. Today, we have engineers and architects and probably 30 other types of disciplines. I was shocked yesterday to learn in our organization, pleasantly shocked, I should say, to learn that we had an organizational psychologist in our firm. And her role is to lead change processes. And so she's involved in these types of jobs that require the collaboration of multi-discipline teams that look a lot different and are a lot more diverse than they have been in the past.
Interesting. Mike or Peter, any?
Well, my answer is exactly the same. On the client side, when we're dealing with cities and towns, first of all, they are much more open to different ideas. When we, with a diverse team, come forward with green infrastructure solutions, they invariably want to hear more. They care a lot about it. They live in the community just like everybody else does. And greener looks better to them. So diverse teams bringing ideas to really an open audience.
Yeah, and I'd echo that. I think it's really how the industry has changed. And I think that there's a much bigger openness on the client side. They're really looking for those types of ideas because they have their stakeholders are asking for what are they going to do that's different for the future, and I think that with the diversity of the talent that each and every organization has out there today, I think that there's a much better mix of things that are coming out, and then they're being celebrated. I mean, there are awards out there now for communities and some of the things that they do, and so with that becomes peer pressure between them that I don't want to be a community that doesn't have something like that. And so they're even asking for more and more of that as a component of the work that you do for them.
One of the things we've done in our organization is in our risk management process. You have a checklist for everything when you're an engineering organization, right? So we've actually formalized sustainability and resiliency in our risk management process, in our risk management review process. Yeah. How about, kind of last question on this subject, how about, is there, in the concept, you mentioned planning, Mike, with this movement towards smart cities, and we talked about sensors earlier, and all the opportunity with sensors and the Internet of Things, is that an opportunity for resiliency and climate change adaptation?
Absolutely it is. And I think we're seeing cities weaving all of this together, actually, which of course is what you're leading to. But there's still an element of us being proactive with infrastructure that we maybe are not as good at as some of the rest of the world that has some similar risks. We do a lot after incidents occur, and we're able to get the political will and the funding and so forth. So monitoring and measuring is great and it's important, but getting out in front of some of these things rather than cleaning up later would be a great improvement.
Any other comments on?
I just think he's hit the nail right on the head. It's we're very great. We're great at reactionary engineering. The proactive nature of it is planning for the future, and what could be events is challenging because everybody's competing for the same monies. And I think that planning is becoming a much bigger part of that. I think that also communication with all of the various stakeholders to drive some of those solutions is going to be critical to the future success of having more proactive solutions implemented in the marketplace.
I think that I agree with two fellows here. I would add one element, though. With all this ability to monitor and measure and collect the data, we now have in these smart cities a big data issue. Yes. So I think sort of the next step is how do we apply a robust and manageable and actionable data analytics process to perhaps help us to predict and be more proactive than we are at this point.
So I'd like to, as the last subject, I'd like to talk about is project implementation, which is really the nexus of a lot of the subjects we've talked about. It's the nexus of policy, economics, and technology, right? And as engineers, we like to solve problems. And whether that is pour some concrete or come up with a revised plan for our water resource management or our groundwater management, it really is about implementing an idea and a concept. I think most of us would agree that there's a trend to, it takes longer to develop projects, it costs more money, it takes more communication to be able to successfully implement a project. I think that's primarily some very interesting comments this morning about the connection points and what I like to call the rise of the stakeholder empowerment and involvement. I know most of us keep track of what are our opportunities for our company, our organization. What are our client opportunities? What are our project opportunities? I was updating ours this last week, and 42% of our top priorities had slid to the right, meaning that it was going to take longer for those projects to come to fruition. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. Certainly funding is a challenge. I don't know about you all, but I am bitterly envious of the transportation industry. You know, there's no other way to describe it. I mean, the TIFIA program in transportation is funded at $1 billion in 2014. And we were very proud in the water industry because we got a pilot program of WIFIA for $2 million. You know, massive discrepancy. I think it goes to hidden infrastructure comment. So we certainly have funding challenges, and that moves projects to the right. It used to be that projects were funded with federal dollars, some regional dollars, and we topped it up with local dollars. Now that's flipped. It's really all about how the local entity can find the money to finance the project. And of course, when you're dealing with public agencies, that involves a political conversation. And when you're dealing with industrial and the commercial clients, it's a rate of return business conversation. And as we saw, GDP is low, capital investment in the atoms industry is low, so it's a challenge on either side of the equation. I think the other thing that's really pushing projects to the right is this concept of public benefits. And my favorite example is a project in California where it was replacing a diversion off of a stream. And the old diversionary structure had been built in the 30s. It was probably a concrete square box, probably cost a couple $100,000 to build, right? The new diversion was shaped like a fish, had state-of-the-art fish screen technology. You know the project I'm talking about. State-of-the-art fish screen technology, a new river walk, a artistic interpretation wall to bring forward, you can tell, the feel of the river into the infrastructure, a 5-acre buffer zone between the residents and the artistic wall that they just asked got built along with the fish screen that's shaped like fish. So $800 million later, we had a new river intake from it. So those types of involvement and public benefit desires are really increasing the cost of our infrastructure and also taking a longer time to be able to implement it. I think one of the challenges or solutions to this is communication, in communicating with stakeholders and bringing that, which typically we engineers are not super great at. Do you have any examples of where an agency has done it right or an industry has done it right that could be lessons learned for us in the industry so we can help our clients on good communication, good stakeholder involvement?
I think it boils down to we're no longer providing engineering solutions.
Right.
We're really providing social solutions that have an engineering component to them.
Yeah.
And we need to start to address them that way because we don't. And I mean, you talked about it, that, I mean, it's really, from a communication perspective, it's not how we approach the job. A lot of times it's not how the client even is trying to address the job. But on a best practices side of things, you know, you look at, again, a community like Singapore. It's a small island that has 5.5 million people, doesn't have enough water to sustain itself, but they get 180 inches of rain a year, and it all runs off into the ocean. So they had concrete, ditches basically that got everything away from the city so that they didn't have flooding. They turned around and they decided to implement a program called Active, Beautiful, Clean. And they just renaturalized their rivers, and then all of their parks are now catchment areas to reintroduce the water back into their ecosystem. And they did that all with a very extensive public outreach program, similar to what they did with the New Water, which Tony talked about earlier, and that kind of thing. They really started with the public first and got them on board, so they were driving the solution. And then, what happened after that, we're just implementing what everybody had already committed to.
Right.
And our challenge, I think, is that we're implementing something and then we're trying to get people to buy in as we're going. Yeah. I think we really need to sort of flip the equation with respect to that and start to think about what do we want this to look like at the end?
Right.
And then what are the steps that need to, people to buy into it? And then how do we implement that to make that happen?
Yeah. Mike?
I agree with all of that. The other really unique thing about water in the United States is the degree of fragmentation that we have. 50,000 water utilities or agencies. And we compare the pace of getting things done, for example, to transportation, where oftentimes you're dealing with 50 DOTs. Right. And decisions made at the state level rather than this extreme fragmentation we have in the water space. Big difference. I'm not sure it's sustainable, but we're observing all of the same things that you mentioned.
Absolutely. I think one of the interesting issues, and I think, Peter, you said it, which is we have to be social engineers as well as technical engineers. And I think that goes to an interesting word, which is acumen. And so we talk about having business acumen within our organizations so that we can make strategic interrelated decisions, right, that move our organizations forward. I think our public sector clients have a lot of stakeholder acumen. And it's interesting if we could merge the business acumen that we bring to the table with their stakeholder acumen, we could probably maybe reverse this slow down trend we're seeing in terms of project implementation. So anyway, some really interesting broad topics, and we have about 10 minutes or so to take questions from the audience, and you've got some really smart people up here to my left who'd love to answer some question on any topic related to water. I know there's... Yeah.
Hi, Clint Robinson from Black and Beach, and I've got maybe 20 questions here, but I'll stick to one. We spent a lot of time talking about the nexus of energy and water. We didn't really talk about it this morning, and there's some energy professionals here in the room. We spent a lot of time talking about 3% of the Earth's water is potable, while 96.5% is seawater. What are we going to be doing as an industry to reduce energy costs or reduce energy needs and or brine disposal to start adapting ourselves towards using seawater as a main supply of water and solve our solutions? Or are we going to sit around and wait for Elon Musk to do it for us?
Yeah, I'm happy to start, and then I guess, Tony, this was your bailiwick a little bit, but desalination absolutely fits into this reuse paradigm. It's one of the tools that we're using, high-pressure membranes. I don't know that any systems doing direct or indirect reuse will do so without desalination facilities of some sort. And having gone through one major desal project in Southern California where the permitting process took 3 times longer than it did to design and construct and start the facility, we're not going to get very far if that continues to be the paradigm. So I think this is an area where the regulatory logjam needs to get broken so that we can start moving some of these projects forward. And brine discharge, brine disposal was the main issue, and it was solved by co-locating that desal plant next to an energy facility. So a few pieces, but it's absolutely critical to solving the reuse and too little water paradigm.
Yeah, I think, Mike, you hit it on the head. The regulatory logjam around desalinization is quite large, particularly on the West Coast. And I may have my exact data wrong, but Peter alluded to something about the flooding that occurred 10 or 12 years ago. I think it was Mike in Baltimore, and then or the drought, and then it stopped. Everybody forgot about it. And I think if we look at what happened in California, there were actually a number of desal plants on the books. Some of them got built, and then it rained, and they're mothballed. So again, back to this concept of a silver lining out of the drought. Perhaps people will remember that these droughts are going to be coming ad infinitum, maybe perhaps more frequent and more intense, which would suggest that you need that sustainable solution, of which desalinization is one. And I also think that there's work going on to look at other opportunities for desalinization outside of, for direct reuse of water without using membranes, without having the brine, ozone biofiltration. I'm not a technical expert, but I think there is work going on in that arena to help part of this problem that creates the regulatory logjam.
Another question?
Yes, can any of you cite any success stories from smaller communities who have found ways to provide local funding for water or wastewater issues? And then if any of you have time, you can talk about why we have bottled water at our water forum.
Well, I think in terms of bottled water, actually, interesting, one of the trends I've seen is the water coolers that are in the back. Starting to see those almost universally at venues like this. So that's a good trend. In terms of smaller communities being innovative on the financial side of the equation, there are a couple of examples where there's been public-private partnerships for specific treatment processes where you can put a fence around it. So a small private partner has come in, built a membrane bioreactor, for example, to develop some recycled water, and it gets utilized close to that specific treatment facility. So what's interesting about that is the local community can't afford the $3 to $5 million that it takes to build something like that, but a small private investor with the right technology can, and there's a fence around it, so it's not integrating into the broader rate structure of the community. And it's acceptable because the water is being used for what would be termed as commercial purposes as opposed to municipal purposes for golf course irrigation, landscape irrigation, or an industrial process water. So you're not butting up against the thorny issues you get in the public trust commentary. So those are some of the issues that are happening, or creativity that's happening. The other in small areas is changing rate structures. So rather than just be a dollar per amount used, there's tiered rates and fixed charges that are being put into place in rate structures. There's actually a lot of innovation happening around the country in terms of rate structures. I don't know if
I would just say, again, the degree of fragmentation in the water industry has made it more difficult to get P3s in place. The United States is well behind other parts of the world, far behind Canada, for example, in terms of P3s, again, because they manage it at the provincial level as opposed to every single locality trying to pull this off. So just something to think about.
And a best management practice, just to challenge all of you on the bottled water issue. Corporately, we don't have bottled water in any of our corporate meetings or in any of our offices. It is a convenience, but we have water coolers, and all of our meetings, the way we have them catered is it's all with water. So think about your own organizations and the opportunity that you have to do that. You know, that is something that you can consider as a best management practice to move forward with.
lead by example.
Yep.
That's great. I think we've got time for one or two more questions. There's got to be more questions.
Well,
No?
I'll tell you what, I'll ask a question.
Okay,
if I could.
Steve?
Virginia, you and I have communicated a bit on what's going on in Congress. One of the rare issues of agreement in the presidential campaign is the merits of infrastructure.
I know.
So the day after swearing in, we're going to get you 5 minutes with the new president to make some recommendations on a water agenda for the coming term. What would that be?
So can I ask for parity with transportation first?
Yes. No, this is water policy. This is
Bitterly envious.
Yes.
No, very good question, Steve. And what's really interesting, there's a social experiment going up in Canada where the new Canadian Prime Minister, right, has come forward and said infrastructure is really important to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars, and we are going to deficit fund it as a nation, and we're going to fund it utilizing P3 financing approaches. And so I think we in the industry are watching what's happening up in Canada, and does it work? Does it move projects forward? And how does it affect their economy also? So I think that's a good example. Look to our neighbors to the north. But what I would tell, if I could tell the administration anything, it would be if we can debottleneck some of the regulatory criteria that is impeding fast implementation of infrastructure projects, that is as valuable as money, because that's time, and time is money. So I would ask for parity between the two fields, and I would ask for fast-paced, legitimate, and real regulation improvement.
I think you need infrastructure on the agenda.
Yeah.
Is the biggest thing, and I think that with the visibility that it's had in this campaign, I think that's important. And taking examples, when the economy imploded in 2008, which was a global implosion, one of the interesting facts is that when you talk about Canada versus US and what's going on, the Canadian government put as much money into water reinvestment to spur project movement forward and everything as the US did. So it's a country 1/10 the population, 1/10 the size, and put in exactly the same amount of money with respect to it. So for all intents and purposes, in my view, we underfunded what we needed to do in the US with respect to that, and we lost an opportunity at that time, and I think we need to gain that opportunity at this point to really move it forward, because you know, water is truly an infrastructure need that's out there. The eroding infrastructure is a real challenge, and we certainly don't want to be you know, reacting after disasters. What we want to be is getting more into that proactive nature that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, I think that if I were to talk to the new president, it would be, well, a little bit of fear-based motivation, right? Water, infrastructure, you never really hear about until there's a problem. Flint is the most extreme example of that, and we'll fix it, I'm sure. When New Orleans happened, it was no problem getting the money to repair the dams and levees and put in the largest pump stations in the world. But we are taking a risk here with the degree of aging infrastructure in our water, wastewater, stormwater systems throughout this country. And we don't want the image of this industry damaged and all the hard work and all that these people are able to do with very old facilities, waiting for the next problem to occur. Get in front of it, even though it's politically less expedient because taxpayers don't drive over, they don't feel the bumps, and it doesn't translate necessarily into votes when folks get a new freeway or an interchange.
Got a question over here.
I got a question on demography trends and how it relates to water. So recently I heard a presentation by a demographer in Utah, and she laid out a map. And you look at where the growth potentially is going to be in the United States. And it's in the Southwest, it's in the Southeast. I live in Colorado. The average moisture content, 10 inches of rain, 5 inches from snow. I came from a state, the average was 45 inches. That state's not growing, this state's growing. And a lot of the water here goes to Arizona, goes to California. Those states are growing. So the question is, and maybe this is just too much of a BHAG, but we got the water, but it's in places where if the demographer's right, if she's right, those states aren't growing at the rate where people are moving to Colorado, to Utah, to Arizona, to Southern California. So is there even a trans-basin solution there, or is that a 100-year pipe dream?
Well, I'll take a whack at it, and then, you know, the real thesis statement behind is water the next oil or is water the new gold rush is that water generates conflict, and it generates conflict because if you go back through history, those who have access to water can grow their economies and their quality of life, and those who don't can't. So what we did in the 1700s and 1800s and early 1900s is we re-engineered our hydrology, right? We moved water around without considering the environmental or the societal impacts. We're now paying the reckoning for those previous decisions, and that's what you're seeing in all the stakeholder involvement, which is we don't want to have these significant cultural, societal, and environmental impacts from large-scale infrastructure moving around of water. So I think where we're currently trending is local solutions, watershed solutions, and that's where you get to the point of, can we do it all locally and within our watershed without having imported water supplies? Personally, I don't think so. I think it's going to take a combination and a compromise and a merging of those two ideals. But do I think in the next 25 years that we will build the California water fix or move water from the Columbia River down into the lower basin states or re-engineer the Colorado River Basin impact or solve the water problem between Georgia and the surrounding states, or redo the water supply situation in New York, which is a massive importation system? No, I don't. I think we have to take the sustainable approach as far as we possibly can, because that's what society and the stakeholders are currently demanding, and then we're going to have to make some tough choices. Because people are either going to have to move, or we're going to have to re-engineer our economy. Yeah.
I totally agree. I think the solutions will be local. We have the technology and the capability. As long as people pee, we have a source of supply. And I don't think we're going to stop that. So I completely agree. We likely won't be moving water around.
I agree also. I think, but the one kicker in that is if we actually paid the true value of water,
Yeah.
that would change some of the demographics because it would drive the economics in a different way. And that's the only element that would probably, because I mean people are moving to those places because the weather's great and the economies are strong, and so that's driving that investment, and so they're trying to move water to get it there. But I think you know, really the politics around it, the solutions are going to be local in the future.
Yep.
My question was actually along the same lines. You know, I'm from upstate New York, very near the Great Lakes, and we're blessed with great water resources in that part of the country. And for years, as an engineer working in the public sector, I've heard people talk about, well, you know, you wait. Someday what's going to bring back economic advantage to this region is going to be our water. I mean, someday this is something that we have that's going to become more and more precious in time as it relates to these discussions. You just kind of touched on the edges of my question, but I guess my question boils down, do you see any movement, specifically I think more in the industrial sector than in the public as it relates to my question, but do you see any real movement in that direction? I mean, is the availability of water becoming a greater factor in decision making as it relates to where economic development is taking place in the country, or is it a secondary thing and the assumption is that somehow we'll figure out how to meet that need, so we're going to go where we want to?
You mentioned industrial. So let me just touch on that and I'll let the other folks expand. I think, at least in the industrial sectors that our company works in, that's a primary question for expansion and relocation or new facilities. Where are they getting their water from? Because it's fundamental to just about everything they do in their process to produce whatever they're processing.
Yeah, I would suggest 10 years ago that wasn't really a consideration for them. Today I think it's at the forefront of their whole economic model when they look at where do they locate.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think industrial water users are among those looking at reuse, again, as hard as anybody is. And they're looking for our profession to come in and give them the answers because water is not their core business like it is in municipal agencies. That's our core business. But they are extremely interested in reuse. They all need water no matter what they manufacture, so they're willing to spend money on reuse if that's the right solution.
Totally agree. Wonderful. I think our time is up. Thank you so much for having us here today and being an engaging audience.